In this episode of Toolbox, we'll take a look at the most popular React meta framework called Next.js. It's an almost magical set of tools that can help you build a site or app quickly. I'll also talk about some exciting new tools in the shorts, including new sass and CSS frameworks, or libraries, or whatever you call them. Yeah, the pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello everyone, this is Ray Villalobos, and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. Follow me and subscribe on LinkedIn and YouTube for more content. If you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, which is raybo.org. So it's been a while since I had one of these episodes. I do apologize, just been super busy. Whenever we get to creating courses, it's like a black hole of time. Opens up right beside us and just sucks all the time that I have in. So as you know, I've been exploring a lot of new frameworks, and I'm super surprised that the pace of the web continues to be relentless. I know that I say it in every episode, but I really feel it. When I think I'm getting caught up to like all the new frameworks, I happen to find a lot of good ones. So I have a few things to show you today. So let me just check the chat really quick. And I do see a lot of people in there already. So hello, everyone. Oh, it's good to see. It's good to see Peter. He usually comes to just about every one of these, I think. And there's Usama and Brajesh. Let me know in the chat where you're sort of coming from. That'd be great to know. And Dewana Hartley, my friend, is also in the chat. If you have any questions, I'll be showing a lot of things, so it's hard for me to look at a bunch of different places. And I love when there's somebody called LinkedIn user. Hello, LinkedIn user. It's a privacy setting, so that's why that happens sometimes, but I always get a kick out of it. Hello, Susmita. How you doing? Hey, India. That's awesome. And Tushar is here as well. And this, is it the same LinkedIn user, or is it a different one than this one? One of them has an exclamation point, so that's cool. So there's Peter again. So awesome. So good to have like a really full room this time. Hello, Sebastian. And there's my buddy from North Carolina, Dewana Hartley. We're the East Coasters on LinkedIn, so we always get a big kick. And there is Tomas Rodriguez from Cuba. Wow, that's awesome. Hola, Tomas. Wow, there's really huge room today, so I really do appreciate that. So we have a lot of cool stuff to talk about, and I wanted to start with what I usually call the shorts, which is just a number of different cool things that I find on the web. As I mentioned, usually when I finish these episodes, I'll put up the show notes in my blog, which is raybo.org. This is the site. Also, it's a great place to see any past episodes. And I do have a section for the shorts, which is where I put all of the cool tools that you see. I haven't put today's tools in there, but if you're wondering, hey, I remember Ray talked about a specific tool, this is a good place to look for them. So you could do a search for maybe something like React or something, and see what comes up on the website. Another good place to go is just to my profile on LinkedIn, and all my social media is right here. So you can go to my LinkedIn profile and usually find lots of stuff that I'm talking about. Look, it's actually playing my show right now. And in here, you will see that I have, or maybe not, I do have a page called raybo.org, and what I'm doing with the page on LinkedIn is any tools or any sort of shorts, which are the mini tools that I'm going to be talking about today. They kind of go in this in this LinkedIn page as well. So usually on my normal profile, I talk a lot about things that are going on. So I talked about Elon Musk buying a bunch of Twitter stock recently and lots of other things. Usually I post daily, but this is where if you're just looking for the specific tools, I'm kind of separating how I do things as well. So let's talk about some cool new tools, and you can see a little preview of one of them right here. The first tool that I wanted to talk about is this really adorable, you can see the cute cat is like cleaning itself as you scroll, and it's pretty easy to use. I mean, it was so cute that I thought, although I don't know how often I would use this, but I think it's kind of cool that it focuses on just animating a specific background and lots of controls. So I thought was pretty interesting. So excellent. Let's look at something else. So this is a new Git client. I'm not sure how old it is, but it's a Git client from the makers of Sublime Text. So this is the editor that I used to use before Visual Studio Code and before Atom. Sublime Text is an amazing editor. It is super fast. I think it's programmed in Python, so it's super, super speedy. And I'm not sure why I was looking at Sublime Text. I think somebody asked me a question about what are some popular editors. And I looked in here and I'm like, wow, they have this Sublime Git client. So it's similar, I guess, to, the GitHub client, but is much more or made for programmers. So it lets you do super advanced things like essentially commit hunks. So you can select a piece of a file and just commit a single line or a single selection of a file. And a lot of advanced things. I do like the, the sort of, Git view of the commits. So really interesting if you're into Git and GitHub like me. Definitely worth a look. I don't use Sublime Text anymore. I do always use Atom, even though it's an older editor, is like a precursor to VS Code. I still use another editor because sometimes I want to make sure that when I'm looking at, a file that I know that it's different from the project that I'm working on. I don't know if that makes sense. But a lot of times, especially for doing these sort of previews, I don't want to have say the project that I'm working on in the same window or window colors and everything as the say the scripts that I'm using. So I like it to look different. Lately, I've been using a lot of an utility, and you saw me do an episode of this. So I use Obsidian to keep all my notes now, and really I also use it to manage my website as well. So all of my posts, actually, I write on Obsidian, and you can look up that episode previously. But this is pretty cool. I think it's worth a look, especially if you're into Git clients. All right, something else that I found super cool was this visualizer for JSON data. So I thought that it's kind of interesting. I've never seen something like this. Usually I use another tool called the JSON editor online when I want to validate my JSON. If I have a file and I want to make sure that there are no problems with it, I usually pull JSON editor online. But I thought this was interesting because it's just a visualizer for your data, and it has a lot of different options. And so, for example, you can change the layout. So now this is like a more, top-down layout. And I imagine you can probably copy this stuff. And you can also turn different controls on and off. So it's sort of simple, but I thought maybe this would be useful if you're trying to sort of visualize or at least show somebody else how to visualize your website or your JSON data. So pretty cool. There's also, so let's talk about a couple of new frameworks and libraries. I get in trouble when I say one or the other because people are nuts sometimes about the difference. So there's this really interesting library called M-. And it took me a while of reading this thing in order to try to understand it. So basically, this is a library that gives you components that are based on regular HTML tags. So they're easy to learn and super tiny, and it tries to use web standards whenever possible. So a lot of frameworks, the way that you build things is by adding like a bunch of classes and a bunch of JavaScript. This is essentially letting you use the standard HTML tags. So for example, if I look at how Let's look at a form, because a form's a good example. So if you look at how you build a form, you just create a form tag, you create a number of field sets for each of the form groupings, right? And then you just use the input tag, type email if you want an email, and it's going to perform all kinds of, first of all, it makes it look great, and it does allow you to do other things with the form elements. I think it does do validation, but so it feels a little bit, if you saw the demo that I did of Pico CSS, Pico CSS gives you a really nice looking website with absolutely no additional classes. That is sort of what this is doing. They claim that that you can plug it easily into something like React or really any framework, and they have some examples of how you do something in frameworks. Also some examples of how you do things in this framework versus other frameworks. So whenever it's controlling something that doesn't have a default existing web tags, so whenever you're not using like a form element, then it uses this m-class, not really class, I'm sorry. It uses an m-custom element. So when we go to, accordion is probably not a good example of this. So let's see, a dialog. So see, to create a dialog, you do an m dialog and you put all the HTML that you want to control there. And then you add a button that has an on-click selector. And of course, you can do this with JavaScript. And it lets you show the modal, and it gives you this sort of nice view. So it makes it really easy to write things. If you've used something like Bootstrap, you have to add a bunch of classes to everything. And as much as possible, this tries to allow you to use default tags, and it wants you to write things with default sort of elements. So there are some classes. So this is showing you how the headings look. There are some custom classes that you use here, but look, it has like a switch component, but it tries to, as much as possible, to just let you write regular HTML, and it takes care of making it look decent, and also it takes care of the functionality without you having to do a lot of work, which I thought it's an interesting new take, and this is kind of the thing that I like to find out about. These new takes kind of inform you about where people are thinking of taking the web. Pico CSS was a good example of something like this that gave you an opportunity to get functionality without having to write a crazy amount of classes. Like if you try to do a button in Tailwind CSS, it's like an insane amount of classes, and you get just a simple button for that. So anyway, something to look at. Keep it in your toolbox. So another one that I thought was pretty interesting was this other library called Cirrus. So this is interesting because it's sort of like Tailwind CSS, but for Sass. So think of like the way that Tailwind CSS works by giving you a ton of utility classes, but this is built with Sass. So the way that you configure it is with Sass variables. If you've got a lot of people still use Sass, and so if you have a big Sass installation, you've been meaning maybe to try Tailwind CSS, but you don't want to sort of sacrifice the features and the structure that you have going on in Sass. This might be a good a good sort of thing for you to try out. It does a lot of the same things. So it analyzes the things, the code that you're using, and then it gives you a tiny file that doesn't have all of the CSS of the framework or the library. It just gives you the CSS for the elements that you're using, and it's configurable, as I mentioned, with just Sass at its core instead of using the JavaScript configuration. I'm not sure that that's better, but if you do have a Sass installation and you've been meaning to play around with Tailwind, this might be the thing for you. The language is sort of unique, so you have these like so if you come from Tailwind, it's not exactly easy to learn because the things are just called something else, but the equivalents are all in there. I'm not sure. Sometimes I think Tailwind, the class names are sort of strange, but it does have a bunch of colors. that you can use. So 100 to 900, sort of like tailwinds, and different sizes for, it has like a different scale that you can use as well. So I thought, whenever I see something interesting, I'm not sure, I don't do enough SaaS projects nowadays to really look into something like this. I really enjoy using tailwinds, especially with component-based architectures like React, for example, or Vue. So this might be something that you find interesting. So let me, I know, Biff, I love this. Yeah, I know. This conversation makes me so angry. I feel like I should make a shirt. Like, ask me what a framework is so I can argue with you or something, because I have a very weird definition of framework, or at least one that nobody else has. For me, like, a framework is a way of doing things. If you use a specific form, think of it like as a house has like a framework, right? A way that it's laid out. If you use that structure, then you get all these superpowers. So a lot of things that are libraries, I consider frameworks. And I think that the distinction, I know the distinction is inversion of control to some people, but it's kind of nuts, because what's Vue.js? Vue.js says it's either. I think React says it's a library now. Bootstrap used to be called a framework. Don't get me started. If you really want to make me angry, start arguing with me about libraries versus frameworks. So let's see, so Peter was using sass, but style components, interesting. Style components, really cool. I'm going to show a little bit of it in my demo today. Very interesting. I don't like that. I feel like the component should have like the CSS in it. One of the things about Next.js is that it gives you almost a crazy amount of ways of using CSS, like every which way that you could think of, it allows you to do. So I like the way that it has like a style component sort of thing in it, and you can just add it to each one of the subcomponents. I feel like that's the way it should be. To create like a separate file, it feels weird to me. But I do think it's really cool, because then you'll see in the demo, like this, when you use style components, the CSS becomes an object, and programmatically, I think it's really powerful to have an object that you can access to do things with. It becomes another JavaScript sort of element that you can program, and it might give you some capabilities that are pretty awesome. So I've been learning a lot about style components and CSS and JavaScript, or JavaScript and CSS, or CSS and JavaScript. Yeah, so let's see if there's anything else. Hello, everyone. And so there's actually like a comparison between them. Super. Z-Link, I use CSS modules. Yeah, with all my Next. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a valid way. I think that some people really hate it. I don't think I hate like anything. I think I'm like open to all of the ways that you can do things, and I when I was doing the demo, I found it pretty interesting. So let's get onto a little bit of Next.js and what it is. I know there's I think Peter's a pretty super pro on Next.js. As you know, I've been looking at a lot of different frameworks. I looked at Astro, I looked at Remix in previous episodes. I looked at smaller frameworks like Alpine.js. Don't kill me, it's a library, I know. But I call everything a framework when in doubt. And I looked at a whole bunch of other ones, and a lot of CSS frameworks and libraries as well. And for some reason, I kept on, I've been meaning to get into Next.js for a long time. And for some reason, I kept on putting it off. I'm not sure why. There's so much to learn, I guess. And even when I started learning frameworks, I put off learning Next.js for a while. But I definitely, it wasn't my list of things to cover. It's just maybe some of the other things were newer. So this is essentially a meta framework, and it adds feature on top of React. React is awesome, but it's basically an interface library, right? It's really just lets you build interface. I actually like that it is that. I don't want things to get too big. That's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of frameworks like Angular, or something that just tells you that there's only one way of doing things. I think that it's better if things are smaller, more flexible, and let people build things on top of that. That's why we have this rise of the meta frameworks. So things like Remix that kind of, go more on the server side, and Astro, which is trying to do a lot of interesting things, partial hydration and such things. Now, what I found about this framework is that it is really mature. So it is on version 12 right now, where React is, I think, version 18 right now. And it feels like it has so many things that have been adopted from other concepts. So it does have things like partial hydration and hybrid rendering. And it felt like it had every feature I've ever heard of. They have their own conference once a year now. So I was super impressed. Actually, I feel like, and I don't know if this is like, maybe I have recency bias, that I like the latest thing that I tried, but I felt like it was actually the best of all the frameworks, at least the meta frameworks. It had everything. I do think, like, if I was going to say what sort of things are negative about Next.js, I would say that it is kind of showing its age in terms of it does have a lot of things, and sometimes you'll find kind of small things that you can, if they feel like they've been tacked on and are not as smooth. So the way that you name some folders, like specialty folders, are the same in two different places, and that felt a little clunky. But I mean, that is a very minor concern because it's very well built. It's built by a company called Vercel, which you can see it's right at the top of the site here. And it's just amazing. I was really impressed, quite possibly like my new favorite for some reason. Let's talk about some of the features. And if you scroll down here, you can see kind of a lot of the different features that it has. So my favorite was, I think, first, hybrid rendering. So when you go to a page on the web, you essentially ask a server to send you a page, right? In recent years, platforms figured out that a lot of the information that is on a server doesn't really change. So to be asking every time for the server to build you a page from scratch from a database using PHP is a little bit cumbersome, or even something like WordPress, where you're reading an article, the article's not really going to change. You may have some interactive features in there that will change, but basically the content doesn't change all that much. So a lot of frameworks started playing around with this concept of pre-building all the pages or pre-rendering everything, right? So what Next does that other frameworks don't necessarily do as well is it just gives you the option of doing rendering any which way you want. So you can have it pre-build, and if you host with somebody like Vercel, it's going to pre-cache all the pages in CDNs, which is going to make your site load up super quickly. And it also, I'm getting some messages here, so hopefully there's nothing wrong. Unless it's somebody else trying to contact me. Okay, never mind that. So, one of the things that Next does is just it gives you the option of doing whatever you want. If you want to use it like a normal framework that pulls the content every time you go on every page, you could do that. You could have it pre-render everything. You can have like Remix, you can have parts of things sitting on a server, and you'll see that in my demo. And you can have other parts, be loaded on demand, or have certain parts be pre-rendering. That was pretty impressive. Also, like the smart routing. So routing means that certain paths will automatically map to URLs on your site, and you can usually use the data from those URLs to send commands back to the server. So you'll see it on the demo, like you can have essentially a URL that's maybe like, here's my cast of characters, and then you can have an ID and retrieve that data. So the way that it does that is really cool, super smart. It actually prefetches some data. So if you have a link to a page that is on your current page, it will try to prefetch that page so that the next page that you're going to load is also going to load a lot faster. A lot of times you go to a website and you're not really clicking on anything, so it's sitting there and taking care of pre-caching potentially things that you're going to click on. Super, super smart. The other thing that I thought was awesome was the CSS support. Like I said, I've never seen anything that lets you use so many different things. It has out-of-the-box Sass support and CSS module support. You'll still need to install Sass separately, but it just understands what a .scss or a .sass file is, and it's easy to add something like Tailwind CSS or Post CSS. It also supports something called Style JSX, which is sort of like Next.js's own version of style components. And that lets you just easily in any module, which is where I like to put my CSS, add some CSS to every component or modify the global style. It handles making sure that there's no collusion, so you don't have to worry about, oh, is this style that I'm writing for this paragraph going to be overwriting some parent? It takes care of all of that for you. So just super smart. So prefetching and hydration as well. So Next.js pre-renders like every page, as I said, and also it will load. So hydration is the concept that you load as little JavaScript as necessary, and then it will, it'll wait until the content has loaded while you're reading it to make anything else interactive. So that's pretty awesome. You can choose. Let's see. Hold on a second. I feel like people are pinging me, and I don't really want to be pinged right now. So it loads. Yeah. It also, for example, for images, it will take care of loading images as long as you use their image component, only if the image happens to be in the viewport. So that's pretty cool. Makes everything just crazy fast. I feel like they have looked at all the new features that people are doing and adopted them very smartly. I've only used this new version 12, so I don't exactly know how it was before. It has an excellent dev environment. I think that's pretty normal, what you're used to seeing. And then the image optimization that I talked to was pretty awesome. Now, it doesn't only show images that are in the viewport. It also optimizes, as long as you use their image component, it also optimizes the images so that if you're coming to your application or your website on a mobile browser, it's going to only load like a lower resolution version of the image. And then when you resize, it'll load a high resolution version of the image. And you don't have to worry about any of that. Also prevents cumulative layout shift, which means like sometimes you're on a page and you're going to click on a button, but then something loads and it like the button moves down and you may end up clicking on the wrong thing or tapping on the wrong thing. So it watches for that stuff. I mean, it just felt so smart and thoughtful, and I feel like so much more mature that it's the reason why when I look at something like Astro or Remix, although Remix, the router that became Remix has been around for a while, it just feels like it's so much farther ahead than other frameworks that I've seen. That's why I'm currently feeling pretty excited about it. So enough of me talking about it. I'm going to show you a demo, and it's a pretty simple demo, but I think you'll see some of the features that I found pretty useful, and then we can come back and I'll answer some questions about it. Let's go ahead and start by installing Next.js. I'm going to pull up a terminal, and I'll install Next.js with an npx command. This will be npx create next app, and we'll put in at latest here. Now this will ask you for a project name. I'm just going to call mine Next Demo, and this is going to install React, React DOM, as well as Next.js for you. Let's go ahead and quit out of our terminal, and we'll open this up in Visual Studio Code. Before we do anything else, let's take a look at what we got here. So you can see there's the default README that's on every project, plus a package.json. So it does have a few commands that you can run. And then you have a config file. Then we have an ESLint file, which is fine. And here we have the main three folders that we're going to be working with. We have a styles folder, a public folder, and a pages folder. Now, public is pretty straightforward. This is where you would put any files that you just want to push along to the server. You also have this pages folder, and this is where most of your work gets done. The index.js file is the entry point. Right now it has some default sort of info there. And then there's this app.js file. This is sort of a file that is shared by all of the different components. So if you want to load anything in here, notice that it's loading a global CSS file. So clearly this is calling the styles folder, which right now has a global CSS file, just some basic stuff for every page on your website. This is where you would modify any of the styles. And then it's showing you how to do a module. This is one of the things that Next does pretty well. it gives you a lot of different ways to work with CSS. This is just one way. If the file has a .module.css, then it essentially converts the CSS into an object, and then you can apply it to anywhere on your page by using this styles prefix. So notice I'm importing the styles here from that module, and then whenever I want to use any of the styles, they have been converted into sort of an object. So when you call in this element, you're actually using the styles name that's right here, and then plus whatever the name of the class that you used. So you can see here that we have this class called container, main, footer. So you can call them directly into your projects, which is pretty cool. Now, in addition to that, it does set up an API folder. You can use Next.js to create an API for you. So if you dump a data file in here, you can configure it so that it works like it would with an API. Let's go ahead and start the server up. So I'm going to do an npm run dev command. And you'll see that it's adding a Next folder. This has temporary files. And now we can open up this in a browser. And at localhost 3000, you can command click if you're using Visual Studio Code right here. And you should get something that looks like this. All right, we don't really need this API folder, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to take a look at this index.js file. Now there's a few additional components that you get. We saw that you can import styles by using this right here. But notice that there's a couple of different and interesting modules that you're importing. If you take a look at this head module, it's essentially being called right here. This component lets you modify anything in the head section of your website. So notice that the title is right here. Let's just get rid of the word next and save this, and you can see that it updates. In addition to that, you may notice that later on, I think it's down here, it's using the image module. And this is basically a clone of the img tag. So you can see that it has a source, an alt tag, and then a width and a height. This is a super special Next.js feature. There's some huge advantages to using this image component. So for example, it will always serve the correctly sized image for every device. It also makes the pages load faster because images are only going to be loaded when they enter the viewport. And that's pretty huge. It's going to manage all that for you, so you don't have to use the HTML source attribute. And it's going to resize the images on demand for you. So it's sort of like a super advanced version of the img tag, and you should use it whenever possible. One of the things that you do want to watch out is that you do want to put in the proportions so that it knows how to resize things properly in here. All right, we're not going to use any of this stuff, so I'm going to clean up most of this stuff right here. And I'm going to call this cast members here. I don't really need this meta tag or even this favicon link. But what I do want to do is create a layout page that is going to allow me to have different pages use the same basic sort of layout. So to do that, I'm going to need to import the layout component. I'll replace this image component right now, and I'll say import layout from, and then I'm going to create a file in a folder called components that's going to be called layout. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll make a components folder, and in that folder we'll create a file called layout.js. So I'm going to do a basic React component, and here I'm going to import the head component as well as pass in a prop into this called children. So I'm going to create a head section for every page. And in here, what I want to do is just use a style sheet from Pico CSS. This is going to give me some basic styles. And so to use this, what I'm going to do is click on Get Started. And I'm going to just put the CDN link from here, and I'll paste it so that it's on every single one of my head elements. Now, because this is JSX, I need to put the slash at the end of this link. And then the only other thing that I need to do here is have a div with the children, right? So this is where it's going to put the rest of the page. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back over here. Now I'm importing this layout tag, which means that on my index file, I'm going to type in or use that layout component. So wrap everything with that layout component. And I need to export the layout as the default out of this component. So now you can see that there's actually nothing here because in this index file, I didn't actually add any content. I no longer need this extra module, and this div doesn't need to have this class name right here. And I do need to add something in here. So I'm just going to put an H1, and now it says cast members. And one last thing I'll do here is add a class of container. So I'm going to do a div, or I'll just do a main with a class name of container. And so now this is going to pick up the Pico CSS style sheets, which will give me a responsive grid that looks a little bit nicer. Other thing that's happening here is now if I create any additional pages, they're all going to use the Pico CSS styles because I've added it to this layout. Next.js has a few methods that you can use to bring in some data. So I'm going to switch back over to the index.js file. And what I want to do here is use another export statement. And I'm going to create a constant and use a method called getStaticProps. So this is going to allow me to use the JavaScript fetch API to get some data. So I'll use this fetch API, and I'm going to point this to one of my personal servers where I have just a data.json file. This could be a call to a regular API. You could actually use the API that Next.js allows you to create, but I'm just going to call this sort of static file. And once I have that data, then I'm going to bring it in and convert it into the JSON format. Now, once I have that, then I can issue a return statement and bring that into the current component through the props object. And in here, I'll just say the cast will have that data that I get from the server. So I'm going to save that. Really, nothing's going to be happening quite yet. But up here at the top, then I can receive that as a prop into this particular component. And then I can use it to list some of the information here. So let's just go ahead and say, we'll say cast, and we'll get the first one. And you may need to refresh this page right here. All right, so let's go ahead and make this into a component. So we're gonna go in here to components, create a new file. I'll call it castlist.js. And this is going to receive the cast prop. And what we're going to do here is we're going to map the cast. And we'll start with something simple. And we'll just have but the member name here. And now I need to go back into this index and make sure that I'm calling that here. We'll go ahead and import this cast list. And then we'll use the component down here. And we'll pass along the cast. And now you can see that all the members appear right here. All right, that's pretty basic. So let's jazz up our component a little bit more. So I'm going to import link. This will allow me to create links to my individual cast members later on. And I'm going to import also that image component we saw earlier. All right, in this div, I'm just going to put in some inline styles. So you can still do inline styles like you do in React. In here, I will say display grid, and I'll use grid template columns here. So here I'll do a 4-column layout, and I'll put a gap in here of 30 pixels. All right, so now for each one of these members, I'm going to add an image using that image component. And for this, I'm going to need to put in the source. Each one of these cast members has a slug property, and that has the normalized name of the image. And they're all SVGs. I've already moved these into the public folder. There's now an images folder in there with all of my images. And this needs to be member, and this will bring in all of the images. Let's go ahead and add a few styles into the member name here. It's time to add a link to the details page right here. So here I'm going to add a link. I'll set the href to the path of the member with an ID, and I need to specify how it's going to come in. So this would be as member and the member ID, and I can include my key right there as well if I want to. So I can take it out of this. I need to go ahead and close that link tag. So after this div, then I'm also going to convert this div right here to an anchor tag. So it'll look like a link and behave like a link. So now I can roll over these different items right here. And if I click on them, right now it's going to go to a 404 page, but we're going to go ahead and fix that. Let's go and create the path we just asked for. So in the pages folder, I'm going to make another folder. So I'm going to make a cast folder, and I'll do a slash here and then type in brackets ID. This is going to be both a cast as well as an ID folder. And in that folder, I'm going to need to create an index.js file. Let's start by importing the layout component as well as the link component. And then we'll create a constant for this component. And we'll bring in this cast member as a prop. Now I need to bring in the data for each individual cast member. So I'm going to do an export here at the bottom. And instead of what I did here in the index page where I got static props, I'm going to use something different. This is going to be called get server side props. So this lets the server actually go and retrieve the data. So it's not something that the client is doing whenever you run the application. So let's go ahead and see how that works. All right, so we're going to bring in into this variable called context, and we're going to do stuff that's similar to the index.js file. So I'm going to copy this fetch right here and this data retrieval. And I'm even going to copy this return statement right here. It'll just be a little shorter. So let's go ahead and paste that here. Then I'm going to create another variable here called cast member. And this is going to take the data and then run a filter so that I'm asking for the data that matches the ID that I'm looking for. So when I click on one of these right here, it's going to pass some information. So if you look at the URL, even though it's not working, you'll see that the URL has a 5 here because I clicked on the element with an ID of 5. So each one of these cast members will generate a path with the proper ID. So I need to make sure that I can find that. So I'll say item ID. I'll look through the context that I received back, and I can get to the ID of the element that I clicked on by looking for params ID here. All right, and whenever I return my props, I'm going to say cast member. And I want to get the first element in that array because when I filter, it's going to essentially look for any of the items that have the same ID as the one in my path. And so that's going to still return an array. It's just going to have one item. And so I want to filter that. But then when I retrieve it, I want to make sure that I specify that it's the only item that's going to be left there. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we need to sort of start laying out what this page is going to display. So here we can just return, and we're going to use the layout component. We'll type in some HTML here. So main, class name, it's going to use container. And I'm going to bring in here the cast member name. Right, that should be enough for a little test. And let's see what happens. So we click this. I noticed that this is actually assuming that the path is going to be member. And we've actually renamed this thing cast. I was originally going to call it cast, but then I changed my mind. I think member here makes more sense. All right, so you can see now that the name comes up. Let's go ahead and finish up some of the other work. Let's go ahead and add a paragraph here. with the cast member bio. Occasionally you'll see that it wants to perform a full refresh, and that's fine. Just go ahead and hit the button at the bottom. I want to go ahead and add a link back to the original page. So this is going to be pretty simple, just href back to the main path. And here I'm going to use a Pico CSS sort of regular button to say back to cast. Right, there's that. And I probably want to add an image. And to do that, I'm going to bring the image component. Let's go ahead and add it in here. And for this, I'm going to bring the high resolution version of the image. So without the _tn.svg and everything else, I think looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and save that. And I do need to give it, some sort of width here. So let's try 600 by 800, and that brings in the higher resolution version of the image. And now these things should be working well. And I am noticing that whenever I click on any of these, it's actually bringing up the first one. So it looks like I just missed an equal sign right here. So I think that's pretty awesome. It's a pretty simple bit of code, but it kind of shows you most of the things, or a lot of the things that come with Next.js. Something that I'm not showing you is the fact that you can actually have those pages also pre-render. Since the code for those pages wouldn't really change, it's just retrieving data from an API. You could actually ask it to, hey, these pages that you're going to get from retrieving the API, I want you to pre-render them, and it'll just pre-render all the pages. And if you host with somebody good, they're going to be cached into CDNs. So the copy that it grabs is going to be the copy closest to your user. So I was blown away. I don't know about you, but I was blown away into all the stuff that you could do and how much sense it made. And I feel that if you were looking at other meta frameworks like Remix or Astro, a lot of the ideas from those frameworks, like especially I think Astro, that has the hydration, are being implemented into React. I think into Next.js, the advantage of something like Astro would be that it is a true meta framework. It's not tied to React, whereas Next.js is tied to React. There is something called Vuetify, I think it is, that is sort of like a clone of this for Vue.js, but Astro happens to be more generic in what it allows you to do. So I noticed that there were some questions in the chats. Let me go through them. Let's see. So I saw some earlier. So, do you need to, okay, so let's see. Do you have to provide multiple sizes? No, you don't. It actually will generate them for you, which is amazing. And you don't even have to, if you use, I think in HTML, you can use like a source set and have like a number of images. This thing's just going to take care of them for you. I mean, how beautiful is that? Just that feature, I think, is like this killer feature, and it will automatically adjust to the size of the device, the viewport of the device, and serve you a smaller image. That's what that image component is all about. So super pretty awesome. Okay, the middleware feature. So it allows you to create an API right on. If you think about it, what's Vercel? It's a hosting company. And this is where I think Remix is trying to sort of break in. The fact that they were like a router for React, and then they broke out into their own framework. One of the advantages of Remix is that it assumes that you're going to be working in a backend of some type, but Next is actually giving you the option. How do you want to work with us? Do you want to have a server that handles like the building, the pre-building? Do you want to pre-render everything and have the server pre-cache like all these files? Do you want us to manage your images? There's even like a script component that lets you partially hydrate the JavaScript so that it doesn't load all the JavaScript. It just loads whatever it needs to render the page. And then whenever you're interacting with the page, that's when it loads like the JavaScript. Or, if you're, idle, then it can do that as well. Super smart. I don't think you can go wrong with this framework. I can't believe I'm so excited about it. So did I already answer? The unit of measure is generally pixels for any width and height on an image. So it's just really cloning what HTML would do. The important thing isn't, so remember, and the image component is actually managing the images for you. So it is making them responsive. So what you have to worry about is the proportions. So if you have like a square image, doesn't really matter what you put in there, just make sure that the numbers are the same, and it will take care of resizing it to the proper size. But it will, like when you saw that when I didn't specify a size, it just loaded the image really small because I had put in 100 by 100, so it made it like super tiny. Just give it some number that makes sense for your project, and it will take care of resizing it. Those files are SVGs, so they are super tiny anyways, the ones that I showed on the demo, but it could do the same thing with any other sort of images. So let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting naming convention. Yeah. So in addition to those two different methods for handling how the data is read, so with the first one that I used, you saw that every time the page loads, it's going to make that query to your API and retrieve the data for showing all of the cast, right? But for the other one, it was actually letting the server prefetch that data and then display that data. And the third option would be you could have it pre-cache like all those pages, and you can use either of the different methods for doing that. I didn't show that last method. It's a little bit more complicated, and I'm trying to keep these demos sort of as giving you a taste of the framework without overwhelming you. If you want to try out the project, let's go ahead and start by installing Next.js. I'm going to pull up a terminal. Forgive me. So if you want to start, if you want to take a look at that piece of code to play around with it, you can take a look at this GitHub repo. So it's like github.com/planetoftheweb/next-demo. It's the finished version. Now I did notice that after I ran it, it complained that I actually put the made a layout, put the link to my CSS on the layout. The layout is meant to actually be a way to load up different layouts for different kinds of pages. As I mentioned, I think in the demo, there's a page called app, and this app page is, I think, where I was supposed to import my call to Pico CSS, but it worked. I noticed that it complained afterwards. Let's see. Other than that, let's see. What is I already got that. I've heard the Next.js supposed SPAs as well as I'm not even sure what an MPA is. So single page apps, multiple page apps. I mean, it does, I guess. I mean, it's designed to let you do, pre-render a bunch of pages. So that would be a multiple page app, I guess. It's not really either way. It just gives you the tools to build, I think, whatever you need. So I don't think that it's necessarily considered a single page application, because a lot of what it can do is pre-render pages and pre-render components. So it really, the routing, let's see. I guess if it's pre-building pages, I mean, one of the advantages of a Remix was that it lets you create hierarchies of the pages, so that when you're loading things, you're loading small pieces. I'm not sure if Next.js is doing that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that feature gets added soon. Like I said, I only had a week to work with this thing. So let's see. It's routing handled by React Router. I don't know if they're still using React Router. So remember, React Router is what became Remix. I'm not sure if it's still the router that they're using by default. It looks just like React Router from when I used React Router in my old days. So they didn't change any of the syntax. So I don't know if they're using specifically React Router. So yeah, Peter, I'm curious because you've been using this a lot longer than I have. So how do you set up SCSS? Super simple. All you do is first you do have to do like an npm install and install sass. But then other than that, you just either import the file, just like you import the modules, and then it'll just, it understands that .scss or a .sass extension by default. And that's what I mean by it has built-in support for Sass out of the box. So there's not like you have to go into the configuration file and mess around. There's not a lot of that. I didn't even touch the configuration file, where if you go to other places, it's a lot of configuring. So out of the box, super cool. What library can I use with Next or React to create animations and stories? I'm not, there's so many of them. I don't know enough about it. Maybe Peter can sort of chime in as to what he likes using. There's so many different libraries. Since I hadn't done the Toolbox for a while in the shorts, I had an interesting looking one. So you'll have to wait for maybe next week so I can show you. It's like a 2D animation library, but there's so many of them that I wouldn't be able to tell you a specific one. So can you post the GitHub repo? Yeah, if you scroll all the way to the top of the chat, I put all the links to all the things that I was showing. So you could just scroll all the way to the top and they'll all be there. Also, probably later on today or tomorrow, you can go to rabo.org and look at all the past episodes. I'll have a full post of all the links there as well. Same thing on the YouTube channel. So it's like youtube.com/Planet of the Web as well. I'll post everything as much as I can everywhere. So I haven't, Madi, I'm sorry, but I haven't really. Maybe somebody like Peter can chime in on the middleware feature in the new version. I mean, I just was introduced to it as the fact that you can actually, why put in a data.json file is if you can create something that handles the routing, the querying, like directly. This is the advantage of something like Next.js, that it's really assuming that you have the option of working with a server. So it lets you create literally the API that has the middleware to handle those sort of requests directly in your project, which is just crazy. It's so good. I'm so excited. So React Next. Emotion. So I'll have to look at that one. I'll have to look at some of the other libraries. I think we have a few more minutes. I'm going to scroll up to see if I missed anything. But such a pleasure. And it does make me feel better when a lot of people show up. So I thank you for coming. I will probably be doing these regularly for at least a few weeks. We're getting some other big projects coming in, so I apologize if I don't have one. My intent is to always have one. It's just that with this series where I'm literally learning like a new framework every week, it does take me like a few days of focus, and sometimes I just don't have that sort of time. So thank you much for coming, and hopefully you'll make it to another one. I'll try to send some invites. Just keep track of my LinkedIn profile. That's where I post everything, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Take care.